"She's not on the list," the hostess sneered, turning her back without a second glance. The woman stood frozen, clutching her purse like a shield, every eye in the restaurant burning through her worn-out jacket. Laughter bubbled at the bar, sharp, cruel, cutting deeper than any knife. She turned to leave, heartbreaking, and that's when the door opened behind her. A familiar voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Is this how you treat your guests?" Gordon Ramsay stood there, eyes locked on her, and what he did next, it left the entire room breathless. "Welcome to Dignity Tales. Let's uncover what really happened." She paused at the threshold, the restaurant's glowing sign casting her in half-light. The evening air was cool against her cheeks, but inside, laughter and clinking glasses beckoned like a warmth she wasn't allowed. She smoothed the faded denim of her jacket, heart hammering against ribs that felt too tight. Her shoes, scuffed and well-traveled, sank slightly into the plush carpet as the hostess glanced up, just once, before returning to her guest list. In that fraction of a second, the woman saw the calculation in those eyes. "Welcome, but not for you." Her pulse thundered in her ears. She pressed her lips together, recalling the text she'd sent her sister only minutes ago. "I saved for months for tonight." A pinch of anxiety curled in her stomach at the idea that her hard-earned celebration might vanish before it began. She raised her chin, determined not to waver, but the hostess offered no acknowledgement. Instead, she turned to greet a well-dressed couple, ushering them inside on a wave of rehearsed warmth. The woman's chest tightened. Each step forward felt heavier than the last, as if an unseen weight anchored her outside. She tasted the evening's menu in her mind. Smoky lamb, velvety risotto, a slice of chocolate mousse she'd dreamed of savoring. Yet here she stood, a silhouette out of place, her simple blouse and worn jeans marking her as an intruder among tuxedos and cocktail dresses. Across the street, neon lights flickered. A faint hum of traffic mingled with the music drifting out when the door opened for departing diners. She imagined slipping inside so subtly no one would notice, becoming invisible in plain sight. Yet the idea felt both comforting and terrifying. Her breath caught at the swell of voices within. She planned this moment as a reward for herself, a brief escape from bills and obligations. Instead, she found herself branded by her appearance, unseen for who she was. Her fingertips closed around the strap of her purse, drawing it closer. Somewhere in her chest, a spark ignited, a quiet rebellion that whispered, "I belong here too." The door clicked shut behind another departing couple, leaving a ripple of cold air that brushed her back like rejection. She lifted a hand to her collar, pressing it against her neck as if it might shield her from the chill. Through the glass, she watched the restaurant's interior glow, a sanctuary of warmth that felt miles away. Her breath came shallow, each exhale a visible puff hanging in the lamplit doorway. Inside, a waiter whispered to a hostess, their voices hushed but sharp, like broken glass. Her ears burned at the sound, imagining their words. "She doesn't belong. I can't believe she tried." Even unseen, she felt their gaze, a pointed, icy blade cutting through her confidence. She bit her lip, tasting steel, determined not to let them see her tremble. A pungent aroma of truffle oil drifted out, tickling her senses with a promise of richness she'd only read about in cookbooks. Her stomach clenched, an aching reminder that anticipation can wound as deeply as loss. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, envisioning the heat of freshly baked bread, the smooth swirl of a handcrafted sauce. The memory was warmth enough to steady her, but when she opened her eyes, the hostess was staring at her again, an unspoken question held in her impeccable posture. "What are you doing here?" Her chest tightened, and she swallowed hard against a lump of frustration. Every part of her longed to step inside, but fear coiled in her veins. Fear of mockery, of being cast out mid-meal, of shouting so loud they'd finally hear her. A breeze from the street stirred the hem of her coat, and she shivered, not from cold but from the weight of invisibility. Then the city lights flickered, and a distant siren hummed, a reminder that the world beyond this door carried on, indifferent. She clenched her fists, feeling skin press into rough denim. Warmth stirred in her lungs, a slow rising. Anger, perhaps, or hope. She exhaled, one breath, steady and deliberate. Tonight, she vowed, she wouldn't vanish. Inhaling again, she lifted her gaze, ready to meet whoever dared to keep her out. She stepped forward, heart thrumming like a war drum, and pressed the gilt doorbell. A soft chime rang inside, then silence. The hostess glanced up from her tablet, lips curling in a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good evening," the woman said, voice steady though her pulse raced. "I'd like a table for one, please." The hostess's smile narrowed almost imperceptibly. She tapped the tablet, brown knitting. "I'm sorry," she said, voice sweet but cold, "but we're fully booked tonight." The words landed like stones, sinking into her chest. She forced a nod. "I understand," she murmured, but the hostess didn't wait. She flicked her hand toward the lobby's plush bench, where a florist arranging orchids welcomed those who hadn't made reservations. A silent afterthought. Pain flared behind her eyes, scorching. Fully booked. She pictured the empty table she'd reserved weeks ago, visualizing the candlelight, the menu in crisp script. She'd counted down days to this, her first real treat in months. The hostess gestured again, as if shooing away an errant thought. "Please, have a seat while you wait," she offered, the invitation hollow. She swallowed the lump in her throat and sank onto the bench, folding her hands in her lap. The orchid's petals brushed her sleeve, delicate and fragrant, mocking her fragility. Around her, guests slipped past, jackets draped over chairs, menus placed on tables, laughter like liquid gold. She inhaled the scent of lavender in the air, but it did nothing to soothe her bruised dignity. Every tick of the hostess's head-down tapping on the tablet echoed in her mind. Fully booked. Invisible. The words replayed, each repetition tightening an invisible noose. She closed her eyes and tried to calm her breathing, but when she opened them, a well-dressed couple slid in ahead of her. No reservation, no apology, just a gentle good evening. Their coats were whisked away. They were led to a table draped in white linen. She watched their silhouettes recede into light, her throat constricting. The first real sip of warmth, promised, waited for, slipped through her fingers. Her fingers dug into the bench's velvet, and she understood this was more than hunger. This was erasure, and that realization sparked something fierce inside her. She rose from the plush bench, every eye in the foyer following her retreating shoulders. Her spine felt like a tightrope under their gaze, wavering, destined to snap. Fumbling with her purse strap, she edged toward the exit, wishing she could dissolve into the night air. Each pair of eyes bore into the back of her head, silent judges recording every quiver of her resolve. A couple paused mid-conversation, their wine glasses held mid-air as they watched her pass. He leaned closer, murmuring to her partner. She could almost hear the words. Who is she? What's she doing here? The pair vanished behind the glimmering archway, their silhouettes swallowed by the restaurant's warmth. She felt the weight of their stares like a physical brush, ice against her skin. Outside, the city lights felt harsh, too honest in their brilliance. She hesitated, breath catching, listening for footsteps behind her, but heard only the distant hum of traffic. Turning the corner, she leaned against a lamppost, heart pounding loud enough to feel in her toes. Her palms were slick, her fingers trembling around the strap of her purse. A taxi screeched past, headlights slicing through the darkness. The warmth of the restaurant seeped through the door cracks, promising solace she'd been denied. She blinked back tears, tasting salt and defiance. This wasn't merely about a meal, it was about recognition, about being seen as more than her worn clothes. She smoothed the fabric of her blouse against her stomach, recalling her sister's words. Your worth isn't on display. It's who you are inside. A tiny spark of steel ignited in her chest, pushing back the ache. She drew a breath that felt like reclaiming territory stolen by condescension. Behind her, a shadow detached itself from the dim storefronts, a broad figure moving with purpose. She turned, ready to plead or flee, but paused as he stepped into the halo of streetlight. His silhouette was unmistakable, tall and deliberate. The world seemed to hold its breath, and in that suspended moment, she understood that her story was far from over. She closed her eyes and let the night air carry her back to a sunlit kitchen years earlier. Her mother stood at the counter, flour-dusted hands gently kneading dough, soft hums of a lullaby drifting between them. The scent of cinnamon rolls and warm vanilla filled the room, comfort in every breath. Leaning against her knees, the girl looked up with wide, earnest eyes. "Promise me you'll never let someone else decide what you deserve," her mother had whispered, brushing a stray lock of hair from her daughter's face. Her voice was steady, unconditional. "No matter what they see on the outside, always remember the richness you carry within." At 8 years old, she barely understood each word's depth, but she felt their weight. Her mother's hazel eyes had burned with that same quiet fire she now felt rekindling in her chest. She'd promised then, "I will, Mama." Back in the present, the memory shimmered like a beacon. She could almost taste the sweetness of those cinnamon rolls, feel the flowers powder on her fingertips. The world around her, the sleek cars parked nearby, the distant echo of clinking glasses, felt miles removed from that kitchen sanctuary. Yet the promise remained embedded in her bones, a lifeline to cling to. A distant horn honked, jolting her back to the street corner. She pressed her fingers to her collarbone, searching for the warmth of her mother's reassurance beneath her skin. The ache of tonight's rejection clashed against the solidity of that childhood vow. Tears threatened, but she blinked them away, choosing resilience over despair. Lightning flickered across the sky, and she straightened, letting the memory's flame guide her. She wasn't just the woman they saw in yesterday's headlines or their idle gossip. She was the daughter of that kitchen, forged by flour and lullabies, carrying her mother's creed like armor. The wind picked up, tugging at her hair, as if urging her forward. She inhaled deeply, savoring the cool burn in her lungs. The promise would not let her rest. Tonight, she vowed, she would stand, unbowed, unbroken, because some vows are meant to outshine any cold stare. She hadn't realized how loud her stomach could be until it rumbled like a warning siren in the stillness. The echoes of hunger pressed against her ribs, each pang a reminder of the lunches skipped, the budgets balanced down to pennies. Her wallet lay heavy with purpose, not need. Tonight was meant to celebrate her own hard-won triumph, a solitary feast she'd earned. But here, under the halo of a street lamp, the craving felt deeper than appetite. It was a hunger for dignity, for recognition that went beyond the grind of work and the weight of her worn coat. She traced a finger along the seam of her jeans, imagining the smooth edge of a linen napkin against her fingertips, the gentle clink of fine china. The thought stung more sharply than the cold. A breeze carried the waft of roasting garlic and fresh herbs from a nearby bistro, teasing her senses with what she could almost taste. Her mouth watered, and she closed her eyes to let the scent fill her lungs. Warmth flickered at her core. Hope or anger? She wasn't certain. Hunger had a way of unearthing truths, that her body deserved more than scraps of attention, and her spirit more than casual disregard. She pulled her coat tighter, chest rising and falling with each shiver. In her mind, she replayed the hostess's curt refusal, "fully booked." Those words had landed like a verdict. Yet the promise from her mother, spoken over flour and lullabies, thrummed beneath the ache. She was allowed to take up space. She was allowed to claim warmth. Soft laughter drifted from the restaurant entrance as a waiter stepped out for a cigarette break. She watched him, longing for a crumb of kindness. Gathering resolve, she straightened her shoulders, lifting her chin against the night. Hunger's echo would not silence her. She took a deliberate step forward, letting the appetite for more respect, more warmth, more belonging, light the path ahead. This craving was hers to own, and she wouldn't shrink from it any longer. Her fingers curled around the edge of her purse as she stood in the hush between gusts of wind. The night pressed in, and every instinct urged her to flee back to safety, to the cramped apartment where overdue bills and unanswered voicemails awaited her. But something steadied her breath, the silent fire flickering in her chest. She closed her eyes and listened, not to the hubbub inside, but to the soft constancy of her heartbeat. Thump, thump, thump. Each pulse whispered, "I am here. I belong." The world outside might ignore that truth, but in the quiet, she reclaimed it. A delivery bike rattled by, its tires humming against the pavement. She pictured the rider slipping inside, welcomed with a nod and a warm plate placed before them. The thought stung like salt. Yet rather than caving, she straightened her spine until it felt as rigid as steel. Movement caught her eye. Inside, through the glass, the hostess retreated behind the podium, her back turned. Relief glimmered through her ribs, proof that the woman's world was fleeting, changeable. She inhaled, tasting determination on her tongue. Silence became her armor. No tears, no pleas, only quiet resolve. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, aligning mind and body. The city's nocturnal pulse hummed around her, and she realized that her own rhythm mattered just as much. Wind shuffled fallen leaves across the sidewalk, their crisp crackle awakening memory of autumn's past. Mom's kitchen table, laughter over cinnamon rolls, the feel of belonging. That memory, like an ember, glowed hotter in the darkness, pushing back the cold. She squared her shoulders and took a step toward the door, each movement unhurried but undeniable. The restaurant's interior blurred through teardrops she refused to let fall. Instead, she let her silence speak volumes. I am not invisible. A distant car horn honked in salute to the night, as if underscoring her resolve. She pressed her hand against the cool glass, leaving an imprint that marked her presence. Then, steady and silent, she opened the door and walked inside. The door swung open, and a surge of warmth and rich aromas washed over her like a tide. The scent of rosemary and roasting meat wrapped around her, coaxing her senses awake. For a moment, every cell in her body tense with years of standing on the outside, relaxed into possibility. She paused just inside the threshold, blinking against the soft glow of pendant lights overhead. A waiter paused mid-stride, tray balanced on one hand, as his eyes traced her entrance. She braced for the familiar blade of disdain, but it didn't come. Instead, the waiter offered a subtle nod, barely perceptible, but enough. The hostess looked up, surprised to see her figure framed in the doorway. Her practiced coolness wavered for an instant, as if she sensed a shift. The woman stepped forward, inhaling the mingled scents of caramelized onions and aged balsamic. Each breath felt like a promise, a possibility she'd almost relinquished. Her footsteps were cautious but steady, echoing in the hushed space between tables adorned with flickering candles. The hum of conversation dipped as patrons glanced her way. Curiosity, not contempt, in their gazes now. It occurred to her that in crossing this threshold, she'd rewritten her story. A server approached, eyes kind, voice warm. "Welcome back," he said, offering a hand to guide her to a table by the window. No questions, no reservations required. She followed, heart fluttering like a bird testing its wings. As she passed, the scent of fresh basil from a nearby pizza station teased her. Her mouth watered. Her fingers brushed against the tabletop as she sat. The linen felt crisp beneath her palm, a contrast to the worn denim she wore. A small smile curved her lips. She allowed herself a moment of triumph. This was more than a meal. It was proof that change could begin with a single step. She inhaled again, letting the fragrant air fill her lungs. Behind her, the door closed softly, sealing out the cold. Ahead of her lay the evening's menu, a landscape of flavors she'd only dreamed about. She settled in, ready to taste what she'd fought so hard to claim. And that first whiff of change tasted like victory. Murmurs floated through the dining room like drifting petals, soft and insistent. A head tilted here, a silver fork paused midair there. Whispers rippled. "Is that her? I thought she left." The air itself seemed charged, anticipation coiling like smoke. Then someone spoke a name with reverent hush. Gordon Ramsay. It slid across the tables, igniting a flurry of excitement. The legendary chef's reputation for fierce honesty and culinary mastery preceded him. His presence could turn any ordinary night electric. She stiffened, pulse speeding, as the staff's furtive glances sharpened. At the far end, the kitchen doors swung open briefly, and she caught a flash of white coat, a herald of what was to come. The chatter crescendoed. He's here. Is he really? Her breath caught. She'd idolized him since childhood, captivated by his relentless pursuit of excellence and raw passion. The thought that he might cross paths with her, tonight, in this place that had almost shut her out, sent a thrill through her nerves. A patron near her table leaned in to the person next to them, voice low but excited. He's scouting tonight's service for his next show. They say he won't tolerate pretenses, only genuine talent and heart. The words struck her like a pulse, reconnecting her to the promise she'd made and the fire she carried. She pressed a hand to her chest, where her pulse echoed like a spotlight. The scent of sizzling scallops wafted by, a prelude to the performance behind the swinging doors. Patrons sat taller, voices hushed as they stole glances toward the kitchen. Every clatter of pots and pans felt like a drum roll. Her knuckles whitened around her napkin, adrenaline mingling with resolve. If his name carried power here, then her truth could too. The invisible walls of judgment trembled around her, threatening to crumble. From the kitchen, a confident stride crossed into view. White-clad, authoritative, he scanned the room, eyes sharp, posture commanding. Her breath stilled. This was the moment when legend met reality, when the barrier between outsider and insider might finally shatter. And as his gaze locked onto her, the room held its breath. The kitchen doors parted like theater curtains, and he emerged. Gordon Ramsay in crisp white, sleeves rolled, presence as electric as a lightning strike. Conversation faltered, cut mid-sentence. Forks hung, suspended. He surveyed the room with those intense eyes, every motion deliberate, as though carving judgment from the air. She felt the floor shift beneath her, a gravitational pull drawing him closer to her table at the edge of the dining room. Her breath hitched. This was the moment she'd rehearsed in her mind, yet never expected to live. The candlelight flickered across his features, illuminating the lines etched by years of passion and rigor. Ramsay's steps were quiet but inexorable. A waiter hovered by her side until Gordon waved him away, voice low but authoritative. I'll handle this. The staff melted back, giving the two of them space. The restaurant held its breath. He stopped just in front of her chair, gaze fixed, searching. She lifted her chin, meeting his eyes with steady calm. The world beyond the table blurred into insignificance. He glanced down at her simple attire, jeans, a faded blouse, and for a heartbeat she braced for disdain. Instead, his lips quirked in something like a smile. "Ew," he said, voice carrying through the hush. "I've been watching." Her pulse pounded as he leaned in, inhaling the aromas around her and of her, an unspoken question hanging between them. The air tingled, charged with potential. He straightened and extended a hand, not the brusque gesture of a critic, but the open invitation of an ally. "Come with me," he said. "Let's show them what real flavor looks like." A murmur of surprise rippled through the room, but she rose without hesitation. Gordon's grip was firm and confident as he guided her toward the hearth of the restaurant, where fire met steel, and she would finally claim her place. As they passed, the patrons watched in stunned silence, the promise of transformation shimmering in the air. And for the first time that night, she felt truly seen. He led her past gleaming countertops to a quiet corner behind the pass, where the hustle of service softened to a steady hum. The heat of the stoves brushed her skin, carrying the scent of caramelizing onions and searing steak. She opened her mouth to speak, but he raised a finger, an invitation to listen. He reached into his pocket and drew out a crisp white apron, the fabric stiff with promise. Holding it before her, he met her eyes. No words, just a gesture. You belong here. Her chest tightened as she accepted it, the weight of its unspoken meaning settling like warm bread in her hands. Gordon tied it around her waist with practiced ease. Each knot felt like a small victory, proof that she'd crossed an invisible line. The room beyond the pass buzzed on, but here, in this pocket of steam and salt, everything halted for her. He nodded toward the line of waiting dishes, risottos, glazed carrots, tender lamb chops, each plate a canvas. His brow furrowed slightly, not in criticism but in challenge. Then, softly, he said, "Show me what you see." Her pulse fluttered. What did she see? She inhaled deeply, tasting oregano and butterfat on the air. She imagined color and texture melding on a plate, vibrant green herbs, the ruby pool of reduced wine sauce, the ivory swirl of mashed potatoes. She let her fingers brush the edge of a hot skillet, felt its pulse. He watched her, silent encouragement in the tilt of his head. The subtle curve of his lips told her she'd passed an unseen test. Around them, pots rattled and orders crackled over the expediter's bell, but she stood centered, anchored by his faith. Then, in the clearest voice she'd heard all night, he spoke. "That's it." The word was simple, but it roared in her veins. The applause of flames under burners became an ovation. He placed a hand on her shoulder, light, supportive. The gesture was small but seismic. The moment her silent resilience met his unspoken respect. In that touch, the cold stares of before melted away, replaced by a warmth she'd only dared to imagine. Her fingertips brushed the edge of the counter as she took a trembling breath. Beyond the swinging kitchen doors lay the dining room, territory she'd once been barred from. Beside her, Gordon Ramsay gave a curt nod. It was time. She stepped forward, the apron's crisp fabric brushing her thighs. The heat of the pass faded into cool air scented with wine and polished wood. Patrons raised their eyes as she emerged, first surprise, then curiosity, even a spark of admiration. Her heart thundered, but she kept her gaze steady, matching Ramsay's confident stride. They reached a small table where an untouched plate of seared sea bass sat waiting. The hush that settled felt profound, as if the room paused to witness her arrival. Gordon slid into the seat, gesturing for her to stand beside him. The linen tablecloth felt impossibly smooth beneath her fingers, a silent invitation to make this moment hers. She crouched slightly to meet his eyes at table level. He'd asked her to choose a finishing touch, and now the choice was hers. She closed her eyes, inhaled the brine of the sea bass and the citrus zing of lemon oil. In her mind, she saw a flourish of microgreens as fresh as spring rain. Opening her eyes, she placed a gentle sprig atop the fillet, a minimal yet bold statement. Gordon leaned back, arms crossed, watching as a soft smile curved his lips. The servers nearby stilled, their movements respectful. The dining room's hum softened to a reverent silence. Then Gordon tipped his head toward her plate and said, "Presentation matters. So does who you are." His tone was quiet, but it reverberated through her chest. She straightened, letting the weight of his words settle deep inside. She picked up the fork, its cool metal grounding her. As the first bite met her tongue, tender fish, bright citrus, aromatic greens, she tasted more than skill. She tasted acceptance, hard-won and savory. Behind her, the pass glowed under the kitchen lights. Ahead, the dining room unfolded like a promise. She'd crossed a threshold that night, out of invisibility and into belonging, and nothing would look the same again. A ripple of astonished gasps drifted through the dining room, soft as silk but impossible to ignore. Conversations stalled mid-sentence. Someone's wine glass clinked against a plate, abandoned in surprise. She looked around, faces pale, jaws slack, eyes wide as if witnessing a miracle. A sharply dressed man near the window leaned toward his companion, voice hushed but urgent. "Is that really Gordon Ramsay with her?" His friend's eyes darted skeptically, but the curve of their lips betrayed wonder. Another diner, napkin halfway to her lap, set it down again, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Across the room, the hostess watched from behind her podium, confusion creasing her brow. The reservation book lay forgotten at her side, pages fluttering in the gentle AC breeze. She pushed off the podium, stepping forward as if to reclaim control, but hesitated when Ramsay's gaze landed on her, steady, unyielding. At a table for two, a couple exchanged a stunned smile. The man gestured toward the pair at the head of the room. I thought she didn't belong. Look at her now. His partner's hand flew to her heart, voice trembling. She earned every bit of that seat. The soft murmur of shock swelled into a chorus of whispered praise and disbelief. Patrons reached for their phones, screens illuminating hopeful faces as they captured the scene. A world-renowned chef seated beside the woman they dismissed. Likes and comments flared to life in real time. Unbelievable, powerful, she deserved this. Her chest tightened with emotion as the hum of astonishment washed over her. Each murmur was a testament to the change she'd carved with quiet resilience. The memory of cold stares and curt refusals felt like a distant nightmare, eclipsed by this new reality. She belonged. Gordon Ramsay's hand found hers beneath the table, warm, reassuring. His eyes met hers. You see them now. She squeezed his fingers, tasting triumph on her lips. The room's shock had become her vindication, a symphony of surprise that heralded her arrival. And in that charged hush, she realized the world couldn't unsee her anymore. She raised her fork, the candlelight dancing across the polished silver. A hush had settled, every eye drawn to her hand as it hovered over the plate. Below, the seared sea base lay nestled atop a pale lemon butter sauce, flecks of green microgreens crowning its surface like dew-tipped grass. Her fingers trembled only slightly as she guided the fork through flaky flesh. The first bite was deliberate, a communion of texture and taste. The fish yielded under gentle pressure, melting into tender shreds. She paused, closing her eyes as the warmth spread on her tongue. Bright citrus dancing with a whisper of fresh herbs, a faint echo of ocean on a summer morning. A soft gasp echoed behind her, but she kept her eyes shut, savoring that moment of belonging. This wasn't just a dish. It was proof that she mattered here, that her journey from rejection to acceptance had led her to this exact flavor. When she opened her eyes, Gordon Ramsay watched with a slight, approving nod. The corner of his mouth curled upward, not in mockery, but in genuine pride. Around them, the soft murmur of resumed conversation carried notes of admiration and awe. She swallowed, chest warming with a glow that no winter chill could touch. The flicker of candlelight revealed guests leaning forward, as though drawn into her story one forkful at a time. The hostess watched too, her posture softened, apology lingering in her gaze. She lifted her glass of water, a simple gesture full of grace, and took a sip, clear, cool, grounding. In that glass, she saw her reflection in miniature, poised, strong, radiant. She remembered her mother's words about inner worth, and how a promise could light the darkest night. She placed the fork down, pressing her palm to her chest. That was perfect, she said softly, voice steady. Thank you. It wasn't just to Gordon, but to herself, for claiming her place at this table. The restaurant's warmth embraced her as if it had waited all night for this moment. And with that first bite, she knew her story had changed course forever. Heat surged through her veins as the last bite settled, igniting something fierce and uncontainable. The candles flickered, shadows dancing across the walls like living embers. She realized that the same fire that powered the stoves now burned within her, an inferno of confidence and defiance. Around her, the dining room hummed with renewed energy. Patrons exchanged excited glances, their conversations laced with admiration. The polished mirror behind a sideboard echoed their whispers. She's incredible. Look at her glow. What a moment. Each word felt like stoking for her inner blaze. Gordon leaned forward, voice low but charged. You've got that spark. His praise landed deep, fanning the ember in her chest into roaring flames of possibility. She met his gaze, the reflection of his faith shining brighter than any chandelier. She placed her napkin on the table, rising to her feet as if lifted by the heat of her own resolve. The tablecloth rippled beneath her hand, a silent drumroll. She looked around at the sea of faces, some awestruck, others repentant. She no longer felt the sting of their earlier scorn. Instead, their amazement fueled her fire. Her palms warmed with energy. She imagined the scorched iron of a skillet, the crackle of oil bursting into flame. That same intensity now pulsed in her heart, a reminder that she could transform anything she touched. A server emerged with a fresh plate, but her appetite had shifted. She didn't crave food so much as the taste of triumph, the heady rush of being seen. She caught the hostess's eye across the room. The rigid posture softened, apology and wonder mingling in her expression. No words passed between them, but a silent contract formed. Respect earned, assumptions burned away. She exhaled slowly, releasing the smoke of doubt. Then, with a steady step, she crossed to the pass where chefs worked, pots bubbling, flames licking steel. She raised her chin and offered a nod of gratitude to the rhythm of clanging pans. Tonight, she realized, was more than entry. It was ignition, and as the kitchen's flames roared behind her, she felt herself become something unstoppable, a living blaze that no cold stare could ever extinguish. She stood at the edge of the dining room, the residual heat of the kitchen still humming at her back, and felt a shift in the air. Her silhouette, once overlooked, now commanded attention. Diners turned in their seats to watch her, no longer as a curiosity, but as a presence worthy of regard. A hush fell as she crossed the room, every footstep a drumbeat of her reclaimed identity. Where moments ago she'd been a phantom, she was now undeniable. The hostess stepped aside, clearing her path, eyes wide with a mixture of respect and remorse. The chefs paused mid-chop, spoons hovering over simmering sauces, as though the very heartbeat of the restaurant had synced to hers. She moved with quiet confidence, fingertips brushing the backs of chairs as she passed. Warmth bloomed around her, welcomes whispered in nods, smiles that spoke of open doors rather than silent walls. A child at a nearby table peeked up at her, eyes shining like a mirror of her triumph. She offered a soft smile in return, touching the brim of her apron as though to seal the moment. At the head of the room, Gordon Ramsay stood and raised his glass toward her. His nod was simple, precise, a salute to her crossing from invisible to undeniable. The restaurant followed suit, glasses lifted in a spontaneous toast. Her chest swelled as she accepted the gesture, the sound of clinking crystal ringing through her soul. Each chime was a testament. She belonged. The walls, once cold sentinels, now felt like witnesses to her breakthrough. She stepped onto the small stage by the window, where a single spotlight hung above, and used all evening. Now it flickered on, illuminating her face with gentle clarity. She inhaled, tasting the crisp air mingled with applause, and for the first time felt seen in every sense. Gordon stood beside her, hand extended in an offer, not of pity, but of partnership. She took it, heart steady, eyes alight. Tonight, the simple woman had become the undeniable centerpiece, a story told in warmth rather than whispers, in accolades rather than snubs. As the spotlight held her gaze, she realized she would never be invisible again. He stepped forward into the soft glow of the spotlight, the bustle of the kitchen dimming to a respectful murmur. Gordon Ramsay's usual fire tempered into something more reflective as he cleared his throat. Eyes on him. She felt anticipation ripple through the room. "I've spent my life chasing perfection," he began, voice low but resonant. "Critics, ratings, Michelin stars. There's always another standard to meet." He paused, scanning her face, as though his confession was meant for her alone. "But tonight, I realized I was missing something essential." A hush settled. She listened, heart thrumming. "When I first saw you outside, I saw fear in your eyes," he continued. "Fear of rejection. Fear of being judged for what you didn't have. rather than what you carried inside. Walk steps echoed behind him, but he didn't flinch. I know that fear. I've chased approval in kitchens where I felt like the outsider too. Her pulse quickened, empathy lighting her own embers. He smiled wryly. I learned that true mastery isn't just technique, it's empathy. It's about tasting someone's story, not just their dish. He turned to the diners.